think I dropped it too. Okay, got everybody's grades. Okay, so before we start talking about Mary Shelley, I just want to go over a couple of quick things with you. First off, right, we are going to have a vocab quiz this weekend again, so make sure that you complete it by midnight. I will send out reminders as usual on Friday morning and on Sunday to make sure everybody gets it done. Your proposal for paper 1 is also due on Monday. So does anybody have any questions about that assignment? Now, Jordan, you had one before class started that I hope I answered to your satisfaction. Does anybody else have any questions about paper 1 or specifically about the proposal? Yes, again.
Is this turn it in class or turn it on Georgia?
You'll turn it on Georgia, and you'll have till the folder will close at midnight, so you'll have all day to get it. Any other questions about paper 1?
It's off of any story we've read up to Sunday, right?
Essentially, yeah. And anything that we have read up to this point, you can choose to write paper 1 about. And the proposal is a chance for you to get some feedback on your idea, and a couple of possible hints for me about directions you might go before you really commit to sitting down and writing the paper. So we do also have an exam, not next week, but the week following, right? So does anybody have any questions about the exam, about what that's going to look like, or what I think you should be doing for it, or what have you? Yeah, Jordan.
Is it going to be multiple choice in what we've covered in the reading physics?
It will not be multiple choice. So it's going to be in 2 sections. There's going to be a short essay section where I'm going to give you 3 questions, and you will write one 500-word essay to answer one of those questions. Right? So pick one question to answer. You'll write a 500-word essay. Then I'm going to give you 15 vocab terms. You're going to choose 8. And you're going to do the same things you do for the quizzes. Right? You're going to give me the text, the author, and the definition. So what I will do to help you all prepare for this, sometime tomorrow I will email you a list of sample exam questions to help you study. They won't be as specific or as focused as the questions on the actual exam, but they'll let you know what kinds of themes you should be thinking about, and maybe even give you a chance to experiment with certain texts that fit those particular themes, right? And if you're prepared to answer 2 of the sample exam questions, then you should be in pretty good shape for the exam itself. I will also give you next week. So I'm going to give you, actually, on the midterm I usually give you 12. I'm going to give you 12 terms. You'll choose 8, right? So I'll give you a bank of about 25 vocab terms that I actually want you to know, right? To narrow down what you actually need to focus on for the purposes of the exam. And look, one thing I do want to note too is that the exam for me is as much about a kind of self-assessment as it is about assessment of how you're doing, right? This is my chance to see how well I'm communicating to you the concepts that I really want you to know and the concepts that I really want you to take forward out of this class. The papers are where you're going to get to do a little bit more creative thinking on your own, right? So in a lot of ways, the exams are just kind of telling me how I'm doing. So I want you to do well. Right? I want everybody to ace this.
Sorry, just
go ahead.
So there's 3 questions for the essay. We choose one of the 3, 500 words.
That is correct.
And then when you send out the sample questions, you're going to send out a bank of 25 words, and 12 of those will be on it?
So I'm going to give you the bank of 25 words next week.
12 of those will be on the exam.
And 12 of those will be on the exam,
Okay.
yeah, and you'll choose 8.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm just kind of trying to break it down into what I can reasonably expect you to know by the middle of the semester. Try to make it as easy for you as possible. All right, any other questions before we proceed? All right, great. So what did y'all think of the story I had to read for today?
It's easy to follow as a story.
Okay. All right, yeah, I mean, a short story is something we're a little bit more used to dealing with than a narrative poem, right? So this is maybe formally a little bit more familiar to us. It's, the sort of thing that people still write. Anything else that you liked about it, that you didn't like about it, that bugged you about it?
It's almost like a twist of Romeo and Juliet.
Okay, why would you call it a twist on Romeo and Juliet, Jordan?
Because it was like two people, and then he thought that she didn't love him, and then he drank punishment.
Yeah, although in Romeo and Juliet, it's like it's a fake suicide potion, right? So it's supposed to not kill love necessarily, but kill the body, at least temporarily. So I think there are some formal elements here. I never really thought about that before. But there are some bits here that are similar to Romeo and Juliet. You've got the young lovers who are kept apart. You've got a potion at the center of the narrative, right? Although this potion actually does very different things. Yeah, good. What else do you guys get out of this?
I liked how she kind of switched it up on us, because I was expecting him to just fall in love and not love her. And then it was just kind of a symbolic, you won't love because you're going to live forever. And by that, you can't really have time to fall in love and then love them. You're just going to die.
Yeah, so that's
that was really cool.
Yeah, that's the crux of that quiz question I asked you, right? Is that, at the end of the story, does Whimsy still love Bertha?
Yes.
Does he? Are you sure? What makes you think he still loves Bertha at the end of the story?
I mean, maybe it's not love. Perhaps it's obsession. Almost. I don't know. I mean, he was miserable, but I think he was just miserable for the fact that he was still alive.
He's miserable. She's miserable, right?
Yeah.
He's miserable because he can't die and isn't growing older, right? Which means he can't integrate into any particular community, right? She's miserable because he's aging and she's aging and he's not, right? So everybody's unhappy.
He wanted her to be happy though. By trying to let her go, be I need to go, you can stay, do this. So that could be wonderful, I guess.
And I want to actually kind of point to that spot in the story. If you go to page 1042, can I get one of you to read me the paragraph? Grace, since you pointed it out, why don't you be the lucky sap here?
Okay.
The paragraph near the bottom of the page that starts, I return to the good souls embrace heartily.
I return to the good souls embrace heartily. I will not, my Bertha, but for your sake, I had not thought of such a thing. I will be your true, faithful husband while you are spared to me, and do my duty by you to the last.
So let's parse the language here, right? What does he not mention in his reasons for staying?
Loving that he's doing it for himself.
Okay, why would you say he's doing it for himself?
Well, he says, for your sake.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if someone said that to me, I'd be kind of pissed. I'd be like, do you not want this?
Uh-huh. But Jordan, can you repeat what you just said?
That he said nothing about loving her, saying he wants her.
Yeah, he says nothing here about love, right? What does he cite as his real purpose in staying here? What is it that actually drives him to stay?
His duty as a husband.
Yeah, I will do my duty to you, right? kind of stuck with you. So I may as well hang around, right? And then if we go to page 1043, can I get one of you to read the paragraph again near the bottom of the page that starts with, why dwell on these minute circumstances?
Why dwell on these minute circumstances? We lived on for many long years. Bertha became bedridden and paralytic. I nursed her as a mother might a child. She grew peevish and still harped upon one string, with how long I should survive her. It has become a source of consolation to me that I perform my duty scripturally towards her. She had been mine in youth, she was mine in age, and at last, when I heaped the sod over her corpse, I wept to feel that I had lost all that really value in humanity.
Okay, so a couple of things here, right? What word pops up again in this paragraph?
Duty.
Duty, yes. I did my duty to her. All right, I did what was expected of me, what I was obligated to do. And when he cries at the end of the paragraph, is he crying for her?
No,
Yeah, what is he crying for?
he lost his one anchor to humanity.
Yeah, this is his last social connection, right? So he's crying for himself, not for her, right? He's crying for the loss of his own social ties. Because everywhere he goes, people think he's a warlock after a certain amount of time. And so he can't stay in any one place long enough to make connections, right? So, in a sense, right, when Cornelius tells Whimsy that the potion kills love, he's telling the truth, right? He's not telling the whole truth about what the potion does. How does the potion kill love?
You can't love the immortal. I mean, you could. Like, it takes away the opportunity of, like, experiencing, like, good and well together.
Yeah.
It's like, you can never do it. You'll always go on the run from people thinking you're strange.
Yeah, you can't fully, it kills love by preventing you from forming any lasting connections, right? So yeah, immortality kills love by making you not really human anymore, right? Aging and mortality are two of the defining characteristics, of our fragile human selves, right? And it's hard to make life have any meaning when it just goes on and on and on and on, right? That seems to be kind of the central problem that Whimsy is dealing with in this story. But how certain are we that Whimsy is actually the central character in the story? Let me put this question to you. What did you all think of Bertha as a character? What
She was annoying.
Okay. What's annoying about her?
She complained too much.
Okay. She complains a lot, right?
I don't know. Just everything she did. In the beginning too, when she was like, she let that sense of money and security override her love for Whimsy.
Okay, or at least her concern for his safety, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, she does seem to be fixated on money and security, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. What else do we know about Bertha? What else does the story tell us about Bertha? About her life, about her behavior?
She's an orphan.
She's an orphan, yeah. Both of her parents are dead. And so, what is her living situation?
She moved to a fancy palace.
Yeah, she's been adopted by the noblewoman who lives in the castle, right? Which means that she is dependent on that noblewoman's good graces, right? And on keeping that noblewoman happy so that she can maintain her living situation. What else does the story tell us about Bertha? What does it tell us about her physically? This is actually important.
She got paralyzed.
At the end of the story, yes. As she gets old, right? She's bedridden and paralytic, right? But when she's young,
Didn't she have dark hair?
yeah, she's dark-haired. And what else are we told about her appearance that's maybe not quite so specific? Why is it that Whimsy's drawn to her? Apart from the fact that they grew up together. What power does she hold over him? She's beautiful, right? So he puts up with an awful lot when they're young, for her sake. Now, a lot of this kind of makes Bertha look to us like an unreasonable, demanding nag, right? Who uses her good looks to manipulate Whimsy, right? What does she do anytime Whimsy is out of favor with her, for example? What does she do whenever she's mad at him? Early in the story.
Complain and mention the fact that he was poor.
Okay, yeah, she complains a lot about his poverty, right? But specifically, when she kind of breaks off with him temporarily, what does she do and make sure she sees him doing?
The fountain.
That's where they meet, right? They always go to the fountain to meet.
Did she stop going at one point? Wasn't there a time when she stopped? He was there by himself.
Yeah,
She's like watching him do that.
yeah, she makes sure that he sees her out hunting with this handsome young nobleman, right? And casting disdainful glances in his direction, right? So in the early years of their relationship, where is all the power located? She has all the power, right? Now, I want to show you the single illustration that appears in the original published version of this story. And I want you to think about what scene from the story it illustrates. If I can just find it, here we are. Come on. Okay, there it is. So who do we have in this picture?
The lady who adopted her.
Yeah, we have the old noblewoman, right? The ugly page walking behind her, fanning her.
Bertha.
Yeah. Who's conspicuously missing from the only picture that was used to illustrate the original edition of this story? Yeah. No sign of whimsy in the picture, right? I mean, I guess, she's clasping her hands and smiling and going off to meet him, right? But he's not actually present in the picture. Why do you think that is? Why do you think this scene is chosen to illustrate this story? It seems weird, right? It seems like a strange choice, like a relatively minor incident that doesn't feature the main character of the story.
Maybe it's to exaggerate the fact that, like, his life, like, Bertha was just like a segment of his life.
Okay.
He was her entire life, I guess, essentially, but he was not, she wasn't for him.
But yeah, like at the beginning of the story, we're told, he's over 300 years old, right? So this is just a brief interlude in his youth.
And we're only getting that part. He said that he was only going to stop talking about his past at birth.
Yeah.
So everything else was irrelevant, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, how much does he seem to have done with his life since Bertha died? Pretty much nothing, right? He's been a pretty inactive immortal, right? He doesn't seem to use his immortality as license to go out and do daring things. More on that in a little while, right? But I think one of the things that's going on with this picture has to do with the circumstances of its publication, right? So Mary Shelley, how many of you are familiar with the name Mary Shelley? Okay, you are. I know you are. You are passing familiar. Anybody else know the name Mary Shelley and what she was most famous for?
Frankenstein.
Yeah, she's the author of Frankenstein, right? In 1818, while still a very young woman, she publishes a novel called Frankenstein that is not only one of the last of the kind of classic period of Gothic novels, it also is one of the first to really kind of fuse the horror mechanics of the Gothic with science fiction. So Frankenstein is a huge success, but she doesn't really make any money off of it. Partly because of bad contracts, partly because she has a growing family to support, especially after the death of her husband, the poet Percy Shelley, who falls off a boat at age 29 and drowns, and the hostility of her father-in-law towards her and her family, right? Essentially, her father-in-law kind of forbids her from continuing to publish under her own name or to promote his son's poetry in any way, shape, or form. Right? He viewed all of this as bringing disgrace onto their family. Right? Sir Thomas Shelley was a real old bastard. And Mary kind of lived on a pittance from him and from what little she could earn kind of by her own writing, right? So she's writing from a constant position of financial insecurity. And she's got mouths to feed. So much of the writing that she does do is done for money. The Mortal Immortal first appears in a publication called The Keepsake in 1833. So The Keepsake was an example of a type of periodical that was really popular in England and the US in the late Romantic and early Victorian periods. Right? They're pretty much vanished by the 1860s, but they're a big deal from about 1820 to about 1860. And so these literary annuals are they're gift books. Where the hell is the man? There we go. They were usually published in the autumn so that they were out in time for Christmas sales. And yeah, typically you didn't buy these books to read them yourself. You didn't actually buy them for anybody to read them. They were intended for display, largely. You bought them as gifts for other people. And yeah, they were richly ornamented and very, very richly illustrated. In fact, the illustrators were often paid more than the authors. And because they paid regularly, lots of prominent 19th century writers wrote for these gift books. Charles Dickens wrote for them, William Wordsworth wrote for them, right? Mary Shelley wrote for them. So they did attract a lot of high-profile writers. And who might you think would be the audience for these books? Who do you think is mostly receiving them as gifts? Can anybody guess?
Women.
Yeah. Basically the same people who had been avid readers of the Gothic in the previous generation, right? These books primarily find their way into the hands of middle-class women. So with that in mind, let's kind of go back to peevish, complaining, demanding Bertha, right? How do you think this story might look if told from her perspective and not from Lindsay's?
She was just trying to look out for herself. In a way, like, make sure, like, she was able, because women didn't necessarily have a lot of power or standpoint, so if she did marry someone who could take care of her,
Yeah.
damage her.
Uh-huh. Yeah. She doesn't have a lot of options, right? She's an orphan. And the only power she has, right, is her marriageability. Right? She can't go out and work for herself. And, you know, by the time that even becomes something they talk about, she's too old. But yeah, all of her life, she's dependent on somebody else, right? She has to find a protector. She has to find someone to look out for her. You know, her parents die, so then it's the old lady. Then, Whimsy is supposed to be her protector, right? But what happens to him, or doesn't happen to him, as she gets older and her beauty fades.
He doesn't get older, his beauty doesn't fade.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He doesn't change, right? So what does that do to the power dynamic in the relationship?
It shifts.
Yeah. By the time she's old, right? He has all the power in the relationship. And the only thing that keeps him around is this sense of honor and duty, right? It's like, well, I promised to love, honor, and obey you. I can at least honor you and maybe obey you, now that we're old. But yeah, she has to beg him to stay, right? Whereas before, right, everything he did, his every thought revolved around her. But, as would have been the case in a typical early Victorian household, right, whimsy can always continue to work. He can find some way to make money, even if it involves moving around a lot. Right? She can't. And I think that given that this story was written with an audience of middle-class women in mind, right? The original readers of this story, I think, would have read Bertha a lot more sympathetically than we tend to. Because their situation would have been not dissimilar, right? And we'll get into more, if we think even about the Dorothy Wordsworth situation from last week, right? Where Dorothy ends up just being kind of an extra appendage in her brother's household after his marriage, because she hasn't, married and established her own household, so she continues to be dependent on him. So, one thing that we haven't talked about here yet is the kind of science fiction-y part of this, though. And I think that is a big part of the story's interest and appeal here, right? So, what do y'all know about Romantic era science, if anything? I will take your silence to mean not much. Okay, so we're looking at a period in which what we call the scientific method, right, observe, experiment, repeat, is still fairly young, right? And the older way of doing things, right, the older way of doing science was called natural philosophy. And natural philosophers tended to work via a kind of logic of correspondences, right? What they believed was that things that were similar to each other attracted and acted upon one another, and things that were different from one another repelled each other. So, for example, if you are a doctor and you're treating a patient who has a blood disorder, you might grind up a ruby, stir it into a glass of red wine, and have them drink it and say, here, this will fix your blood. Now, what's the logic here? Why would they think this would work?
Red.
Yeah, because all of these things are red, right? Blood is red, the ruby is red, the wine is red. So you cure the red thing by adding more red stuff to it, right? Right? Astrology works by the same basic principles, right? The idea is these patterns in the sky that represent animals imprint characteristics on people born during certain months, right? So like I was born, my birthday is March 27th. So I am apparently supposed to have, the personal characteristics of the ram, right? Pushy, aggressive, a little bit short-sighted, right? Perhaps even a little arrogant. Solely because I'm born kind of like within this 30-day period and the sun is supposed to be in a particular pattern of stars, right? So, Cornelius Agrippa, as described in the story, was one of these early natural philosophers, right? So Agrippa is a real person. Born in 1486, dies in 1535, and he was a scholar who was patronized by the wealthy, famous, and powerful Habsburg family. So, the people who ruled most of Central Europe during the late Renaissance. And he's known for being a number of things, for being a satirist, a theologian, a lawyer, an alchemist, and a ritual magician. Now, do some of these things not seem like the others?
Yeah.
What are the odd fits here?
Being a magician and a lawyer.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, some of these strike us as even today were like legitimate scholarly pursuits, right? These are things that people working in universities still do. You don't have, even at a bigger, more posh university, like say, Harvard, serious scholars doing ritual magic, right? But in Agrippa's day, you did, right? Most scholars in Agrippa's time were generalists, right? They worked in several different fields that may not have seemed directly related. And ritual magic was regarded as a legitimate scholarly pursuit. Alchemy was a little bit dodgier because you were essentially trying to make money off of it. You're trying to figure out how to turn, base metals into gold. So that was seen as a little bit less reputable. But, drawing magic circles on the ground and trying to summon angels and demons, not so much, right? So, figures like Agrippa actually fit this early 19th century scientific paradigm better than you'd think. In part because of the way science was sort of performed. So, I'm going to turn the lights up so everybody can see this well. So this is a painting by Joseph Wright of Darby. We call him Joseph Wright of Darby to distinguish him from other Joseph Wrights who were painters. And it's called An Experiment Upon a Bird in the Air Pump. He painted this in 1768. So earlier than Shelley's story, right? But kind of still within the same basic cultural paradigm. So which figure here is the scientist? Who's doing the experiment? Can y'all tell?
The guy that looks like a crazy scientist and robe with long hair.
Yeah, this guy is the scientist, right? And does he look more like a scientist or more like a wizard? Right, with the crazy long hair and the robe and the kind of stare out into right out into the audience, right? There's there's something like kind of like a magician here. And can y'all tell what he's doing here with this air pump? So what he's doing, he's got a bird and a glass bulb here. And he is using the pump to suck the air out of the bulb. And when he does that, the bird starts to suffocate. And then, when he releases air back into the bulb, it revives. So this seems to us pretty damn cruel, right? This is not an experiment that would pass a contemporary institutional review board, right? Animal cruelty tends to be a no-no. But this was actually a fairly popular public experiment in the late 18th century. And public here, I think, is the key word. A lot of prominent scientists were also basically performers. Right? Science was showy. When you discovered something, you went out to the people and you demonstrated it to them in as flashy a way possible, right? So if we look at the spectators here, right? And experiments like this would typically have spectators, right? We've got a range of different reactions here, from contemplation to rapt attention to a young couple here who are on a date, like weird date, right? Let's watch this guy suffocate a bird. Who only seem to have eyes for each other, to these two little girls reacting with horror, right? While their father encourages them to pay attention, right? So there are very few neutral responses here in this audience. And Shelley herself, as a young girl, would have witnessed experiments of this type. Like the air pump experiment, for example, was originated by a guy by the name of Joseph Priestley, who we now remember for having discovered oxygen. There was another traveling scientist and showman by the name of Luigi Galvani, who performed a peculiar experiment with electricity that Shelley definitely witnessed as a girl, and that was probably an influence on Frankenstein. So has anybody heard the name Galvani? Anybody familiar with Galvani's experiment? Yeah, Grace, what do you remember about Galvani's experiment? What did he do?
Didn't he try and bring frogs back to life with electricity?
Not the whole frog, but essentially, yes.
He would try and rebuild them or something with frog, or their legs.
Yeah, he had a pair of frog's legs
And he'd chop them and
that he would hook up to an electrode, and make them jump, right? So, we did actually discover from this, right, from this experiment, that our nerve impulses are electrical. Right? So there was a legitimate scientific value to this, right? When, our brain wants our body to do something, it sends an electrical pulse, right, to that part of the body to induce motion. But it was also an interesting spectacle for people to watch, right? Okay, here's this Italian guy who's coming to town, and he's going to make a pair of severed frog's legs kick, right? Isn't that cool? Okay, maybe you don't think so much, right? But we're a little bit more jaded in our entertainment options these days. And there's that same kind of sense of spectacle, I think, here in the way the science is performed in the mortal immortal. So let's look at the portion here where Whimsy is about to take the potion. Right, if we look on page 1041, can I get somebody to read that paragraph at the top of the page for us?
As he spoke, a golden flash gleamed from the fluid. A well-remembered fragrance stole over the air. He raised himself, all weak as he was. Strength seemed miraculously to re-enter his frame. He stretched forth his hand, a loud explosion startled me. A ray of fire shot up from the elixir, and the glass vessel which contained it was shivered to atoms. I turned my eyes toward the philosopher. He had fallen back. His eyes were glassy. His features were rigid. He was dead.
Okay, so this isn't the point where Whimsy drinks the potion. It's the point where Agrippa has made another one that he's going to try to drink before he dies, right? Although, like, what would probably be the, like, if Whimsy is now eternally 20 years old, right? If Agrippa actually drank this potion just before he was about to die, what would be the probable effect on it?
Be eternally on his deathbed. With
Yeah.
that illness not being able to die.
Yeah, so there would be a kind of irony there. Right? It's like he'll live forever in this aged, decrepit state, right? Also unable to do anything. But I think what I wanted to point to here is the visual impact of this process, right? So you've got these potions bubbling in these distillation machines, right? And how is this physically described to us, the elixir that Agrippa's been working on? Like, what would this look like if you were sitting there witnessing this?
I mean, it would look scary when
Yeah, but also kind of weirdly thrilling, right? You know, here's this golden glowing thing, and then there's this sweet scent, and then a ray of fire shoots out of it and blows up, right? I mean, that sounds kind of awesome, right? It's kind of a shame in a lot of ways that scientists do most of their work behind closed laboratory doors now and don't kind of do this kind of like song and dance in front of the public anymore. Because I feel like that would also probably improve public understanding of science a little bit, but you know, I digress. But yeah, so like a lot of these descriptions of the potions that Shelley fixates on here are drawn precisely from these public experiments of the late Georgian period. I don't know why I was about to turn the lights up. I get to the middle of the week, I get a little bit confused. So I think we've got about 10 minutes here left in the period. The last thing I want to talk about here is the notion here of immortality and what this looks like for the characters in the story, right? So what kind of immortality has Whimsy achieved, as far as he can tell?
Not aging.
Yeah, he's not aging.
Health is top tier.
Consistent good health, yep.
He's happy no longer sad.
At the beginning, yeah, he feels this overwhelming joy, right? It's like, the hell with Bertha, I feel great. Oh, hey, Bertha, yeah. And then, yeah, once he no longer seems interested, right, then she, of course, wants to come right back to him. But yeah, so it's clearly like physical, literal immortality, right? And he makes this reference at the beginning of the story to the legend of the wandering Jew on page 1036. Now, there's a footnote here, but was anybody familiar with this legend? It is kind of like one of the classic anti-Semitic tropes of the Renaissance era and later. Colin, what do you know about the story?
The concept of the wandering Jew is he's one of the ones that carried, or was with the pack that carried Christ on the cross up to be crucified. He's, because of his sin, he was cursed forever to wander the world.
Yeah, specifically, the wandering Jew is being punished for having mocked Christ on the cross, right? So, the reason it's important in this particular context, or the reason it's important that Whimsy mentions this legend, right, is again, like, what is immortality to the wandering Jew?
It's a curse.
It's a curse. It's a punishment, right? Yeah. And in most stories in which a mortal character achieves immortality in some way, right, it ends up becoming a punishment in some sense, right? So I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Greek myth of Tithonus. So Tithonus is a prince who's granted immortality, but forgets to ask for eternal youth along with it. So just keeps getting older and older and sicker, and eventually gets transformed into, the gods take pity on him and transform him into a grasshopper. But, because that's, I guess, just the kind of thing they do. But yeah, like in most literature, right, yeah, mortals being granted immortality is a kind of punishment, right? Even in kind of like the earliest story of this sort that we know of. Are any of you familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh? Did anybody take World Lit? Okay, Jordan, you know the Epic of Gilgamesh. So the scene at the end with Utnapishtim, right? Did you happen to know when you were reading that, like what Gilgamesh's first kind of reaction to Utnapishtim is, and like what kind of comments he makes about him? Okay, that might be a lot to ask, but so Gilgamesh observes this guy who's been living on this island alone forever, right? And he knows, his arms are flabby and weak, that he doesn't seem to have any fire in him, right? He doesn't do anything. The implication being that immortality isn't actually good for people, right? That Gilgamesh's, the lesson that Gilgamesh needs to learn, right, is that mortal life kind of gives you drive to accomplish things, like the walls that he's building around his city. And that immortals don't accomplish anything, they just sit around. Now, this is kind of juxtaposed against a different kind of immortality here. Also on page 1036, if we look at the paragraph, can I get somebody to read just the first two sentences of the paragraph that starts, "All the world has heard of."
All the world has heard of Cornelius Agrippa. His memory is as immortal as his arts of making.
So Agrippa does achieve immortality here, right? But what has made him immortal?
What he's done.
Yeah. He is immortal in memory because of things he did, right? Because of actual fucking accomplishments. So we have figurative immortality, right, as preferable to the actual literal version that Whimsy manages to accidentally achieve, right? Right. Cornelius Agrippa is immortal because people remember it. Whimsy, in 300 and some years, has not done anything remotely noteworthy. And in this way, and I think, this is where we'll end it. This is where we actually kind of see another kind of shift from the, another kind of shift from the Gothic, right? We were talking last time about how the Romantics take these kinds of Gothic tropes, right? And in many cases, in cases like Keats, right, Keats is taking what tropes that were intended for a feminine readership and kind of turning them around for a male readership. Mary Shelley is actually doing something a little bit different here. So do we all remember what the Male Gothic was? Or what a Male Gothic narrative was based on?
Figure it has to overcome like the balance of society.
Yeah. Yeah. Male Gothic novel was had as its protagonist a kind of overreacher sort of character, right? Someone who cannot be bound by social norms. So the Romantics take and transform this into a figure who comes to be called, right after Lord Byron, a Byronic hero. So the prototype for this is in Byron's poem, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. Which he publishes in installments from 1812 to 1818. And the Byronic hero is similar to the overreacher in that he's someone who is chosen exile from human company. Because he can't be bound by social norms, or refuses to be bound by social norms. And so apparently mostly what he does is go and stare at things and brood. So I think what whimsy is, Mary Shelley was personally acquainted with Byron. Byron was a friend of her husband's. I think that what whimsy in this story is a kind of ironic inversion of the Byronic hero. Right? He is in exile through his own actions, but he overstepped accidentally. He didn't actually mean to break social conventions. He just saw, ooh, pretty potion, make me not love. Drank it, and has to live with the results. And like a Byronic hero, he goes around brooding and staring at things, but completely ineffectually. Right, so if we look on page 1044, can I get somebody to read for us the last paragraph of the story? So before I go, a miserable vanity.
Before I go, a miserable vanity has caused me to pen these pages. I would not die and leave no name behind. 3 centuries have passed since I wafted the fatal beverage. Another year shall not elapse before, encountering gigantic dangers, wearing with the powers of frost in their home, beset by famine, toil, and tempest, I yield this body, too tenacious a cage for a soul which thirsts for freedom, to the destructive elements of air and water. Or if I survive, my name shall be recorded as one of the most famous among the sons of men. And my task achieved, I shall adopt more resolute means, and by scattering and annihilating the atoms that compose my frame, set at liberty the life imprisoned within, and so cruelly prevented from soaring from this dim earth to a spirit more congenial to its immortal essence.
Thank you. So what is he essentially telling us this story is? What has he left behind here for the reader? It's a little dark.
Suicide note?
Yeah. He's going off somewhere to try to destroy himself, right? He doesn't want to actually, take his own life because he's still afraid of possible damnation, right? But he wants to try to put himself in a dangerous situation in which he is likely to be killed, right? Which will put to the test whether or not he is genuinely immortal. and will also, he hopes, make his long, up to now pointless existence beneficial to other people in some way. Affirming the preferable nature of this figurative immortality to the literal kind that he's actually achieved, right? Okay, so we are about out of time. Does anybody have any questions or comments about anything? Okay, so let me give you the reading questions for Monday's texts. And did I turn this off? I did, didn't I? No, let's turn it off again.